In 2025, I built my first beetleweight horizontal spinner, Sunstroke. This is how it was conceived, built, and competed in that year. It all started with a dream. No, really, it did. At the beginning of the year, I had a dream where one of my robots had a pair of undercutting horizontal spinning discs for its weapons, and when I woke up, it immediately reminded me of Shredder from the classic Robot War series. Although Shredder was not the only dual horizontal spinner in the series, it was perhaps the best known and certainly the most successful, and I wondered if I could make a good beetleweight version. Certainly, I had never seen such a weapon setup done before, not in the UK beetleweight scene at least, and although the design would be somewhat unconventional, I had faith that it could be an effective one. I went with the name Sunstroke to keep in with the theming started by my Antweight horizontal spinner Setting Sun. I purchased my first 3D printer at the end of the year before, so Sunstroke would be my first beetleweight to be built with printed prototype components to get a sense of scale as to what the finished product would look like and how well everything would fit together. When it came to the discs, I initially had a basic symmetrical design, but would soon opt for an asymmetric design, while the radiation symbol on top of it would ironically make the robot look even more like an old-fashioned tape deck, not unlike what Jonathan Pierce used to describe Shredder as. The pulleys were fabricated from aluminium by Jeremy Hall, and I was using O-rings as belts as it was what I knew best. The bulkheads for the chassis would be made up from TPU, with the centre of the bulkheads being PLAST for rigidity, while the top and bottom panels, with prototypes made of PLA, would then eventually be made out of 2mm carbon fibre cut by Nathaniel Pote. This was my first year experimenting with carbon fibre as top and bottom armour, and although Sprocket Raccoon V6 would be the first of my robots to use it, Sunstroke would be the first one to test it in full combat. The drive was two 22mm BBB brushed motors with BotBits ESCs, which were previously used in Arctic Furno and Xerxes before it. The discs would counter-rotate inwards, as at the time I felt that would be the best approach. The robot was having teething problems even before completion, however. Sunstroke would use two brushless motors for the weaponry, and the 35 amp speed controllers I was using, which were also hand-me-downs from Arctic Furno, couldn't handle going up to full throttle particularly well without producing quite a bit of smoke, so I could only run them safely at half throttle. Worse still, there was a short circuit in the wiring loom, which turned out to be from a pinched wire which David Weston helped me to fix by doing a lovely job of tidying up the internals. The 5mm thick discs also ended up putting the robot just overweight, so I got 4mm ones cut, which fixed the issue. Including the weights of the pulley and the bolts inside, each disc would weigh over 250 grams. It was now June, and the robot was now ready to compete at Battle in the Borough 5 in Queensferry. Battle in the Borough follows a fight night format. You get 3 fights and points are tallied based on how well you do, with the 16 best performers going into the round of 16. I managed this twice before with Arctic Furno, and while Sunstroke was well fancied in the pits by some, I knew it simply wasn't going to be the case, given that it was just an experimental build. The first round fight was against Limiting Factor, a 4-wheeled egg beater. I was hoping to take a few good chunks out of him, but unfortunately I lost the use of my spinners from the first hit as the belts popped off the flanges of the motors on the first impact. I spent the rest of the fight weaponless and getting pummeled, but somehow was able to keep going until eventually by a stroke of luck was able to get Limiting Factor down the pit, which goes to show that it isn't just brute force and ignorance that wins fights, but resilience too. While I was grateful for the win, I wasn't happy how I did not get to use my weapons, but wouldn't be able to correct this design flaw for the rest of the competition. Not that it seemed to matter in the second fight, which was against fellow Scottish team Exposure, a well-built vertical spinner which killed Sunstroke in one hit. The belt stayed on the spinners this time, but the battery cable was unplugged by the force of the impact, and that was that. Cable ties would be used to keep the battery cable in place for the remainder of the tournament. Third and last fight was against Jumbo Shrimp, a well-built 4-wheel drive pusher. This time I entered Sunstroke upside down so the discs would sit a lot lower and get greater engagement. While I was able to land some good hits, unfortunately I just couldn't really do much damage to him, and eventually Ari wore me down enough as he drove me into the pit. 7 points scored wasn't dreadful, but it wasn't enough to qualify for the round of 16, so Sunstroke's run in the main competition ended there. But afterwards, we teamed up with Ross of Olata Robotics and his robot Paralysis for some tag team action. I didn't get to do much in the first round because I lost one of my belts from the first hit again, but also because the tabs that held my brushless motors in stuck out so much that I was caught on the edge of the pit and couldn't get away. It was quite hilarious watching it slowly sink into the pit though. Somehow we won the fight on the judge's decision regardless and went into the semi-finals, but didn't last long. Cut d'Ivoire left a small cut in my base plate, and Baby Deadbod did what Baby Deadbod does, removing my link in the process as well. Paralysis wasn't looking too healthy either. Coming out of this event, the obvious thing I needed to do to improve the robot would be to put bigger caps on the weapon motor flanges to stop the belts coming off so easily, and also to reinforce the carbon fibre base that cracked in the first fight from the impact limiting factor, as there was nothing else to support it but TPU. I would start working on a Mark II version of Sunstroke soon, but Mark I would have one more event at the start of August in Colchester at Robot Rebellion. Sprocket Raccoon was my entry for the main event, but I brought Sunstroke along for some whiteboards and side events. We took part in a Fallway Rumble versus 3 vertical spinners, and the drive was having issues from the get-go because of how bent up the chassis was. Icebreaker gave me a big hit which disabled both my spinners, possibly due to causing the speed controls to reset perhaps, though ultimately I lasted to a double knockout with Delta V, losing the judge's decision. I teamed up with my old opponent Jumbo Shrimp for the tag team where we did reasonably well in the first round against Zephyrus and Ernie. However, in the final against 3 other teams, the Shrimp had to pull out, so I was left to go it alone and actually held it pretty well until Unstoppable Force came in and took out my link. Yeah, I definitely will need to do something about that, but I would say I had more fun this time around and that Sunstroke Mark I had a good send-off. Now it was time to get dangerous. To rebuild Sunstroke for the BBB Beetle Champs in October, first I replaced the tired and weedy old drive system with Repeat Max Mark II brushless motors, and also replaced the weapon speed controls with Fingertech 40 amp ones, which gave me the ability to spin the weapons up to full throttle without worrying about the risk of smoke. I gave the discs sharper teeth and placed them lower down so they would have better engagement and better damage potential, and I also switched the direction of the counter-rotating discs to spin outwards. Spinning inwards tended to suck debris and other things into the setup, which caused the spinners to jam up in their last fight, so I decided to go the other way this time. The chassis now supported the discs from above as well as below, and I used Hardox braces to reinforce it further. Finally, I replaced the removable link port with a Fingertech switch since BBB now allowed them. More people were using them, and I didn't want to lose my fight by removable link anymore. We were all ready to take on Bristol again for the first time since Sprocket Raccoon made the quarterfinals there 4 years ago. Accompanied by my friends Jasper and Spark, who assisted me with repairs as my pit crew, in the first round group battles we were drawn up against Revron and Flick 2. Revron almost immediately launched us into the camera and disabled one of the discs as the O-ring somehow managed to stretch off and go underneath, jamming the weapon. I soon lost use of the other disc when a piece of Flick's wheel got jammed inside it after I damaged it. Mercifully, Revron itself got stuck on the wall with its forks, leaving me and Flick to fight it out. Eventually I was able to get the right-hand spinner working again and took some nice chunks out of Flick before time ran out, but on a very close judge's decision I lost the fight to Flick and could see that Revron had bent up one of the discs and also cracked a bit of the carbon fibre chassis on top, in spite of the Hardox brace that was there to stop that happening. It's an obvious weak spot that I will need to look into addressing in the future, but would in the meantime leave a slightly lopsided weapon which was still nonetheless effective as I went into the next fight. So after replacing the disc with a spare, I went into the redemption round against Hard Nips, Harry Hill's very nicely engineered crusher. The fight was very cut and dry, with me taking off his back panel and then gutting him out all over the arena. This was the single most destructive performance I'd ever given in a fight, and while I was delighted to see my spinners actually do the damage and do the business, I did kind of feel bad for Harry because he puts a lot of effort into what he builds, and I know from past experience what it's like to leave an event with your robot in a bin bag. In the rounds of 32, I took on Aero, a hammer saw which had been suffering from drive problems since winning its first fight. I didn't want to take it too lightly, however, because that hammer saw could go into my carbon fibre top pretty easily. However, I took a few chunks out of his sides and ripped off as many of the bolts holding his wedge on before he eventually knocked himself out when he couldn't self-right. I noticed I was having drive issues myself, but that was mainly because the back end of the robot where the wheels were was not as heavy as the front end was. I took a little bit of damage on the top panel where Aero bent one of the Hardox support bars on the damaged side, but fortunately it was only cosmetic and I was good to fight again in the round of 16 with fellow Scottish competitor Ray. Ray is an adorable fox-based robot who has performed well in past events, and I knew that I would have my work cut out against such a robot. We had a good back and forth fight until I managed to hit him in the back end and take out his removable link. I was pleased that I'd won the fight, but also pleased that I hadn't trashed the fox, because he's just too cute. So, Sunstroke then faced Overhead Saw Chopstick in the quarterfinals, which made me understandably nervous because although I've managed to stand up to overhead saws in the past, Chopstick really is something else on another level. And so it was after I took a few good chunks out of the front and sides of him, he managed to get around the side and landed a good hit right into the top panel where the wires for the spinner speed controllers were, disabling the weapons. But then he landed a second hit on the other side, shredding one of my tyres, but also stopping his own saw as well. It was a pushing match after that where he definitely had the upper hand, although the fight still went the full distance. On what turned out to be a tighter judge's decision than I was expecting, the win was given to Chopstick, who ultimately finished second in the competition. Overall, I was very pleased with how Sunstroke performed at that event, the weapons proving potent and the design proving efficient as well. Making the top 8 in one of the UK's biggest national competitions is no small feat. After the event, I went back to Jasper and Spark's house where we took out all the wiring and tidied everything up to save weight and space. It turned out that Chopstick had also nicked one of the weapons speed controllers, so I definitely will be giving more thoughts into how to defend myself against such weapons in the future, because those parts aren't cheap. However, most of the chassis was still intact, so apart from getting a new top panel, there isn't really a huge amount for me to do where that is concerned. Going forward into 2026, I have plans on what I can do to improve the structural rigidity at the front as well as to where to improve the drive as well as better defences against certain types of weapons, but that will be for another time. Thank you for watching and all the best.